The Lalaurie Mansion. Horror in New Orleans. There are stories that should be forgotten. Tales buried in time, covered in dust and silence, as if they never existed. But some refuse to disappear. They echo in the dark corridors of history, whispering into unsuspecting ears. And the Lalaurie Mansion is one of those places where the past refuses to die. If you've heard of this house, you probably only know a fraction of the horror it hides. A majestic home in the heart of New Orleans, built to reflect wealth and status. But within its walls, something happened that even the darkest nightmares couldn't conceive. Madame Delphine Lalaurie wasn't just a high society lady. She was something far worse. The screams were muffled for decades, but they still live. People who pass by the mansion swear they've seen shadows moving on their own, heard whispers with no source, and felt a cutting chill even on the hottest nights. And the worst part, those who try to understand too much end up seeing things they shouldn't. What happened inside that house? Why does no one dare speak of it openly? And more importantly, why do some say Madame Lalaurie never left? If you think you're ready to know the truth, keep reading. But be warned, some stories shouldn't be told. The Lalaurie Mansion, imposing and silent, stands in the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter as a monument to the city's dark past. Its iron gates, corroded by time, seem to guard secrets few dare to uncover. During the day, tourists take photos, laughing unaware of what truly happened there. But at night, those who pass by the street say they hear murmurs coming from inside the empty house, as if the walls still carry the voices of those who suffered within. Some swear they see figures in the second-floor windows, shadows that disappear the moment they're noticed. The first reports of strange events emerged shortly after Madame Lalaurie's escape. City residents spoke of lights on in the abandoned mansion, even with no one living there. Men who tried to break into the place disappeared for entire nights, and when they returned, never spoke of what they saw inside. It was as if something silenced them, as if there was a price to pay for prying into the horrors of the past. One of them, a young man named Louis Bernard, was found sitting in a nearby alley, repeating the same phrase in a trance-like tone. The eyes, they're still there. As the years passed, stories of apparitions became common. Some claimed to have seen the specter of a woman walking to the mansion's halls, dressed in 19th century high society attire, her eyes hollow and empty like bottomless pits. Others reported hearing scratches on the walls, as if something were trying to get out from within them. The bravest, who dared to touch the mansion's doors at night, say they felt an unnatural cold, a chill that didn't come from the wind but from the house itself. No one knows exactly what still resides there, but one thing is certain. The Lalaurie Mansion never sleeps. Madame Delphine Lalaurie was, to New Orleans society, the picture of sophistication and refinement, a lady of influence, surrounded by lavish parties and artificial smiles. But behind the gold-decorated halls and fine clothes, there was a woman of a dark nature. Her servants never looked directly into her eyes, and neighbors whispered about how the slaves in her house seemed more frightened than usual. To outsiders, it was just gossip. But to those who lived under her rule, it was a real nightmare. The first signs that something terrible was happening inside the mansion appeared in small details. Slaves disappeared without explanation, and others mysteriously appeared covered in bruises and deep cuts. One of them, a young woman named Leah, was reportedly seen fleeing across the mansion's roof before plummeting to her death. They say she chose to jump rather than face what awaited her inside. The case was hushed up, and Madame Lalaurie continued her life as if nothing had happened. But the silence wouldn't last forever. On the night the horror came to light, a fire broke out in the mansion's kitchen. When the firefighters entered, expecting to find only flames and debris, they discovered something far worse. A hidden room filled with mutilated bodies, chained indescribable instruments of torture. Men and women disfigured, deprived of speech, senses, and in some cases, their very humanity. Madame Lalaurie's secret was revealed, but what no one expected was what came next. The fire at the Lalaurie Mansion was a spark that exposed the house's secrets, but also caused its mistress to disappear without a trace. When the enraged citizens of New Orleans stormed the property, they found no sign of Madame Lalaurie. Some say she fled to France. Others believe she hid among the shadows of the city itself. never truly leaving. What is known is that since that night, the house was never the same. Neighbors reported hearing footsteps upstairs, even when the mansion was empty. Some swore they saw lights flickering in the darkness, as if torches still illuminated the basement where the horrors were discovered. There was a collective fear in the city, a dread that the wrath of the tormented spirits still lingered. For years, no one dared approach the place. The mansion's doors remained closed, but what was inside never rested. Over time, the story began to fade into whispers. People prefer to forget, but what is forgotten doesn't always disappear. The silence only amplified what was happening inside. Workers who tried to renovate the house abandoned the job, claiming to hear voices. Some reported feeling a suffocating presence, as if something were watching them closely. And then there was that man, a drunk who decided to spend the night inside the abandoned house. He emerged at dawn, pale and trembling, never telling what he saw. He only repeated one phrase: "She never left." Over the years, the Lalaurie mansion became more than a symbol of horror. It became a challenge to those who didn't believe in ghost stories. Some tried to turn it into a residence, others into profitable businesses, but all were forced to abandon the place. No attempt at habitation lasted more than a few months. Something inside the house rejected the presence of the living. One of the first documented attempts occurred in the late 19th century, when a wealthy merchant bought the property and decided to turn it into apartments. The idea seemed promising but quickly fell apart. Tenants reported hearing screams in the middle of the night, doors slamming on their own, and objects disappearing only to reappear in impossible places. One resident claimed to have been pulled out of bed by invisible hands. Soon after, the building was abandoned. The merchant, once a skeptic, refused to speak of the matter. In another attempt, a school was installed in the mansion in the early 20th century. But teachers noticed that some children refused to enter certain rooms, murmuring about a woman with empty eyes watching them. The most striking case was a boy who appeared with deep scratches on his back after being left alone for just a few minutes. The principal abruptly shut down the school, stating that there was something there that couldn't be explained. The mansion returned to abandonment, and the whispers grew louder. If there's one thing the Lalaurie mansion seems to refuse, it's being forgotten, and some say it finds ways to manifest to those who try to ignore it. Recent reports indicate that the house, in some way, still tries to communicate. Mysterious letters and signed messages, and words written on mirrors have been documented by visitors and paranormal researchers who dare to get too close. One of the most disturbing stories involves a tourist who visited New Orleans and took a photo in front of the mansion. Days later, while reviewing the images, she noticed something more in the photo. Behind her, reflected in one of the second-floor windows, was a pale figure watching her. But the worst happened when she received an email with no sender, containing only one sentence: "You've seen me. Now I see you." The woman deleted the photo immediately and never returned to the city. Another case involved a writer researching the mansion for a book. For weeks, he received handwritten notes left at his home, always with disjointed phrases like, "The eyes never close," or "She walks among us." At first, he thought it was a prank. But when he woke up one night and found one of the notes inside his house on his desk, despite all doors and windows being locked, he abandoned the project and left New Orleans without looking back. What is trying to communicate? And, more importantly, what happens to those who insist on listening? As much as the legend surrounding the Lalaurie mansion scare off the cautious, there are always those who wish to challenge the unknown. One such individual was a skeptical journalist who decided to spend a night inside the house, armed only with a flashlight, a recorder, and his conviction that it was all superstition. He never imagined he would leave carrying something he could never explain. Upon entering the mansion, the first thing he noticed was the absolute silence. It was a heavy, oppressive kind of silence, as if the air were too dense to breathe. Everything seemed calm until, around 2 a.m, the noises began. First, slow footsteps upstairs. Then, a dragging sound, as if furniture were moving on its own. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just the wind. But when he felt a cold breeze brush the back of his neck, and the door behind him closed on its own, he knew he wasn't alone. What happened in the following hours, he never fully disclosed. But what is known is that at dawn, he was found curled up in a corner of the main room, his eyes wide and his lips trembling. His fingers tightly gripped the recorder, which was still on. What was recorded on that tape was only heard once before being destroyed. According to those who dare to listen, the audio contained a single phrase, repeated countless times in a hoarse, hate-filled female voice. "You shouldn't be here." The Lalaurie mansion has many secrets, but there's one room in particular that seems to carry the weight of all the horror that occurred there. Historical records mention a room on the upper floor, locked since the day of the fire. Even during restoration attempts, those who dared open the door reported an immediate sense of unease, as if the air inside that room were different from the rest of the house. Heavier, sick. One of the most well-known stories about this room involves a caretaker who, in 1976, was tasked with inspecting the area after reports of strange activity. He entered alone, armed only with a flashlight. Minutes later, screams echoed to the house, followed by the deafening sound of something being scratched against the wood. When the other workers managed to break down the door, they found a man collapsed on the floor with deep nail marks on his arms and neck, as if something invisible had tried to drag him into the shadows. He never explained what he saw before fainting, but his last words before quitting were clear. "She's still there." In recent years, those who approach this room report hearing low whispers, as if someone were speaking in an ancient, forgotten language. Tourists have recorded knocks on the door, even when the place is completely empty. Some claim to have seen the doorknob turn on its own, but no one dares to enter again, because something or someone seems to be waiting. Over the years, many apparitions have been reported inside and around the Lalaurie mansion, but none are as persistent as the woman with empty eyes. Locals and tourists alike claim to have seen her silhouette wander in the halls of the house, appearing in the second-floor windows, always watching. Some describe her presence as a slender shadow in a dark dress, standing in the dim light, while others swear that, in moments of greater courage, they looked directly into her face and immediately regretted it. It's said that those who meet her gaze experience something far worse than simple fear. Reports indicate that the sensation is akin to being sucked into an unfathomable void, as if time froze and the mind were flooded with disturbing images. A woman walking down the street, near the mansion, reported seeing the specter leaning against one of the windows. The moment their eyes met, she heard a piercing scream in her mind and fainted right there on the sidewalk. When she woke up hours later, her vision was blurred and her ears rang, as if she had heard something the human brain shouldn't comprehend. This apparition has become so well known that, over the years, paranormal investigations have tried to understand its origin. Many believe it to be the spirit of Madame Lalaurie herself, eternally wandering the house where her secrets were exposed. Others, however, say it's not her, but something far worse, something the mansion itself generated from the suffering that occurred there. Whatever it is, one thing is certain. Those who see her never forget, and some never return the same. The story of the Lalaurie mansion transcends time. Decades have passed, generations have come and gone, but the house remains, untouched by forgetfulness, as if trapped in an endless cycle of horror. Some say the evil within cannot be exorcised, for it is not just a spirit or a common haunting. It is the very essence of pain, crystallized within the walls, an invisible weight that drags through every room, saturating the air, waiting for those foolish enough to challenge it. Many paranormal scholars claim that the mansion isn't just haunted, it's a portal, a place where human suffering was so intense that it tore a wound between this world and something beyond it. People who spend long periods near the house report recurring nightmares, visions of mutilated faces, and voices calling their names in the middle of the night. Some even say that, upon touching the mansion's walls, they feel a faint pulse, as if the house were alive, breathing, waiting. And so the question remains, does the mansion still hold the echoes of those who suffered there, or is it something far worse? Something that feeds on fear, that grows stronger with every curious glance, every story told. Because, in the end, that's what legends do, isn't it? They stay alive as long as there are those who fear them. And if that's exactly what the Lalaurie mansion wants, if, by reading this, you've already entered its game, then perhaps it's too late. The Lalaurie mansion still stands, imposing in the heart of New Orleans. Tourists pass by it every day. Some take photos. Others cross the other side of the street, feeling an inexplicable chill. Some say it's just an old building, laden with legends exaggerated by time. But those who listen closely, those who allow themselves to feel, know there's something more there. The story of the mansion didn't end with Madame Lalaurie's escape, nor with the fire, nor with the years of abandonment. It continues, adapting, molding itself to those who dare to investigate too much. Whether this is just a haunted place or something far worse, no one knows for sure. But one thing is undeniable. Everyone who tried to prove the legend was just a tale ended up becoming part of it. And now that you've read this far, perhaps it has noticed you too.